The silence was the worst part. Not the silence after the chaos, but the unnatural, heart-stopping cessation of movement right now, beneath the heavy sound of designer shoes scuffing marble. 3 shadows stood framed in the shattered doorway, their movements sharp, their faces hidden behind black balaclavas. The room, which moments before had thrummed with the soft arrogance of wealth, was now a tableau of gilded fear. Champagne spilled, crystal shards scattered, bodies huddled low. But in the center, near the bar, stood Ilara Vance. She wasn't hiding. She was balancing a tray of delicate, empty glasses. A single bead of sweat tracked down the neck of the lead intruder, visible beneath the edge of his mask. His gun was raised, fixed on her chest, yet her hands were steady, her breath slow. She was counting them. Not the seconds until she died, but the steps until they slipped into lethal range. A single panicked sob cut through the air, and the leader took one heavy, decisive stride toward the woman who refused to kneel. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution waiting for a trigger. The gilded vault was less a restaurant and more a declaration of status, a fortress of wealth where every surface glittered and the air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and unchallenged privilege. The massive chandeliers hung like frozen, expensive rain, casting blinding light over the patrons, the kind of people who treated dinner as a performance of power. Ilara Vance was, to them, invisible. She was 25, a blur of motion in her slightly wrinkled black uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry. Just a quiet, almost intense beauty that was too reserved to demand attention. Her deep hazel eyes, however, had an unnerving quality, capable of reading the tension in the room without seeming to try. She was merely the help, unworthy of a glance, except when she made a useful target for their entertainment. She had been working at the Gilded Vault for 7 months, pulling the grueling late shifts where the tips compensated for the customer's brutality. Ilara carried herself with a dignity that nobody there could appreciate. They didn't know she was the product of a world just as elite, raised in a family that effectively owned half the city's high-rises, taught the very restraint they lacked. She had walked away from that life, choosing simplicity over the noise of status, and now she paid the price for that choice every shift. The tension on this particular night felt suffocating. The soft jazz that usually provided a blanket for hushed power brokering was being aggressively overridden by the VIP table in the corner. As Ilara approached with a fresh bottle of vintage Merlot, a bottle that cost more than her rent, she caught the sneering attention of Silas Thorne, a hedge fund king in his mid-50s. Silas possessed slicked-back gray hair and a gold Rolex that flashed offensively under the light. He spoke of market volatility as though it were a personal achievement. "Don't spill the Merlot, waitress. You couldn't afford the cork, let alone the vintage." Silas's voice cut through the hum, sharp and loud, drawing amused attention from nearby tables. His wife, Beatrice, sat beside him, encased in a tight crimson dress, her smile sharp and predatory. She was the type who would compliment cheap shoes while ensuring you knew they were cheap. Across from them were Brandon, a crypto entrepreneur in his 30s with a suspiciously perfect tan, and his girlfriend, Tiffany, whose overly highlighted hair and massive diamond earrings screamed new money. They were the table that desperately needed someone to feel small. Ilara paused, her hands steady on the tray. "You missed a spot," Silas declared, pointing dramatically at an imaginary smudge on his already pristine wine glass. "I suppose they don't teach proper cleaning wherever you crawled out of," he added. The table erupted in laughter, Beatrice's high giggle leading the chorus. Ilara placed the bottle down with a soft, precise clink. "I will fetch you a new glass immediately," she said, her voice entirely devoid of inflection. As she turned, she heard Tiffany lean into Brandon, loud enough for the entire staff section to hear. "She has no class. I bet the only time she's ever been in a place like this is to scrub the floors." Ilara's shoulders did not tense. Her stride did not falter. Only a momentary tension in her knuckles, pale as they gripped the edge of her serving tray, hinted at the internal pressure. The manager, Victor, a wiry man perpetually glistening with a layer of nervous sweat, intercepted her near the kitchen door. Victor lived only to keep the high-spending patrons happy. "Stay clear of Sterling's table," Victor hissed, jerking his head toward the corner. "He doesn't need you tripping over him." Marcus Sterling, the billionaire, sat alone in the corner. He was 35, lean with dark, intense hair, and wore a suit that was understated but undeniably expensive. His presence was a quiet magnet. People noticed him without understanding why. He was scrolling on his phone, seemingly oblivious, yet Ilara caught his glance for a fleeting half-second. "Understood," Ilara replied flatly to Victor, and kept moving. She didn't argue. She never explained. Earlier, during a momentary lull, Ilara had been refilling a water carafe at the bar. She paused, her eyes fixed on a small, creased photo tucked into the pocket of her apron. It was an old image. A younger Ilara, clad in combat fatigues, standing next to a tight group of soldiers in a dusty, sun-baked courtyard. Sam, the bartender, noticed her stare. "Family?" he asked gently. Ilara quickly slipped the photo back into the shadows of her apron. "Something like that," she replied, her face unreadable. Sam didn't press. Few people cared enough to ask Ilara anything meaningful. But not everyone ignored her. Kira, a 22-year-old hostess known for her sharp tongue and dedication to sucking up to the clientele, caught her near the service station. Kira twirled a strand of perfectly highlighted hair, her eyes glittering with deliberate malice. "You know, Ilara, you should really smile more," she said loudly, drawing a few nearby glances. "You're bringing down the vibe. Nobody wants a gloomy waitress serving their $500 dinner." Ilara set the carafe down slowly, deliberately. "I am here to work, not perform," she stated, her tone calm but firm. Kira smirked, undeterred. "Yeah, well, maybe if you tried a little harder, you wouldn't look like you just rolled out of a shelter." A couple nearby snickered. Ilara's hand paused on the carafe, her fingers tightening just enough to betray a flicker of strain, before she quietly walked away. She knew how to pick her battles. These people, with their designer insecurities, were not worth the energy. The night continued its buzz of arrogance and fine wine until the front doors of the gilded vault were violently wrenched open. 3 men, completely obscured by black ski masks, burst in. Their boots hammered against the polished floor. "Everybody down!" roared the leader, his voice grating and rough like raw sandpaper. The gilded hall immediately descended into pandemonium. Glasses exploded as patrons scrambled for cover under tables, dragging expensive fabrics through puddles of spilt wine. Silas Thorne yanked Beatrice down. His famous Rolex caught on the tablecloth, ripping the linen. Beatrice shrieked, clutching her designer purse as if it were the only thing grounding her to reality. Brandon was already on his knees, muttering pleas. "Take everything, just please don't shoot." Tiffany's sobs were loud, her carefully applied makeup streaking down her face. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire, froze, his face pale, his fingers fumbling instinctively to remove his watch and rings. In the very heart of the collapsing room, Ilara stood. She was holding a tray of empty glasses. She neither dropped it nor screamed. She remained perfectly still, her eyes darting between the 3 intruders, 1, 3, as if conducting a rapid assessment of threat angles and potential exits. The leader, a stocky man with a visible scar above his eyebrow, immediately targeted her. He stormed toward Ilara, his weapon aimed squarely at her chest. "What is wrong with you? Get on the floor," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the sudden, terrible quiet. The other 2 robbers were already shouting, waving their guns, and demanding jewelry. A woman huddled near the VIP table whispered hysterically, "She's insane. Why isn't she moving?" Ilara's grip on the tray was unyielding. Her breathing was slow, unnaturally calm. The leader stepped closer, the muzzle of his gun now inches from her forehead. "You deaf. Kneel." As the robber loomed, the patron's fear quickly metastasized into resentment directed at Ilara. "She's going to ruin this for all of us," hissed a middle-aged woman in a velvet blazer, digging her polished nails into her husband's arm. Why can't she just do what they say? She's nobody, whispered her balding husband, his silk tie askew. She's going to get someone shot. Ilara's expression remained blank, but her fingers adjusted the tray slightly. The room was suffocating, thick with fear and judgment. Every furious glance was aimed at her, blaming her for daring to defy the threat. Silas Thorne, half hidden beneath his table, hissed through clenched teeth, his voice trembling but retaining its familiar sneer. "Don't be stupid. He'll shoot you." Beatrice, her face contorted in panic, snapped, "You're going to get us all killed." Brandon, still on the floor, added, "Don't drag us down with you, you moron." Tiffany's whimper cut just as deeply. "She's nobody. Why is she acting like she's something?" The room was a storm of contempt. They didn't want her to fight. They wanted her to break, to confirm she was as insignificant as they believed. But Ilara did not break. Ilara exhaled, a slow and deliberate release of breath, her eyes locked onto the leaders. In one fluid, practiced motion, she shifted her weight, stepping just outside the gun's firing line before the robber could even register her movement. Her left hand shot out, grasping his wrist and twisting it hard. The firearm clattered onto the polished floor. Her elbow came down immediately, striking his jaw, and the leader crumpled to the ground like a fallen statue. The tray in her right hand remained unshaken. She set it down gently on a nearby table, her movements as precise and careful as if she were simply clearing a plate. A collective, stunned gasp rippled through the gilded vault. The remaining two robbers froze, guns raised, their predatory confidence instantly cracked. Ilara stood loose but ready, her gaze fixed on them. Leo, a young waiter barely 20 years old who usually shared tips with Ilara, crawled out from behind a service cart, his face sheet white. "Ilara, stop," he whispered pleadingly, his hands raised. "You're making it worse. Just get down, please. You're not a cop." The nearby patrons seized on his words. "He's right," muttered a man in a tuxedo. "She's out of control." Ilara shot a quick, unreadable glance toward Leo, then turned her full attention back to the robbers. Her silence was not arrogance. It was absolute focus. She didn't have time to explain that she had been a sergeant in the Navy Special Forces, that the restaurant was not a battlefield, but her body knew exactly what to do. The second robber, a lanky man with twitchy hands, snapped out of his shock and charged, screaming, "You think you're a hero, tease it." His aim was sloppy, his panic clear. The guests did not cheer. They turned on her with renewed venom. Beatrice shrieked from behind a chair, "She is going to get us killed." Victor, the manager, trembling, yelled, "Stand down, Ilara. Let the police handle it." Brandon muttered, "She's out of her damn mind." Even Tiffany, through her sobs, managed to deliver a jab. "She's nobody. She's going to ruin everything." Ilara ignored them. She ducked beneath the robber's wild swing, spun on her heel, and drove her foot into his stomach. He crashed through a nearby glass table, the shattering sound loud enough to make half the room flinch. As the glass settled, a woman in a heavy gold dress stood up slightly, her voice dripping with pure disdain. "Who does she think she is? Some action movie star. She's putting on a show and we are all paying for it." Her husband, a heavy-set man, nodded gravely. "She's reckless. A waitress shouldn't be playing hero." Ilara's hand briefly brushed the edge of the table where she had set her tray, but she did not look at them. The hostility radiating from the patrons was palpable, a wave of dark resentment. They didn't see courage. They saw a subordinate stepping out of line. The third robber was more cautious. He didn't rush. He pulled a knife, the blade catching the chandelier light, and moved toward her slow and deliberate. "You're dead," he growled, lunging low for her side. Ilara sidestepped, her movements flowing like water. She caught his wrist, twisted it until the knife flipped into her hand, and used his own momentum to slam him down. His head hit the marble with a dull, final thud. It was over. 15 seconds. 3 men down, groaning or unconscious. The room was stunned into absolute silence. Ilara stood over them, the knife held loosely, her breathing barely heavier than before. Her eyes sharp, capable of cutting through steel. A silver-bearded older man, his suit crumpled from crawling, pointed a shaking finger at Ilara. His voice booming in the quiet room. "She is dangerous. You saw how she moved." His wife, frantically clutching a diamond bracelet, nodded wildly. "She's not one of us. She must be some kind of plant, maybe working with them." The absurdity of the accusation hung viciously in the air. Ilara carefully set the knife down, her movements slow and deliberate, as if to prove she was not a threat. But when her eyes briefly flicked to the man who accused her, his bravado crumbled, and he shrank back beneath her steady gaze. Minutes later the police arrived, radios crackling, boots heavy. They cuffed the robbers, dragging their groaning forms out the front doors. The guests began to stand, their voices rising in nervous, frantic chatter, but the whispers about Ilara did not cease. "Maybe she's a criminal herself," murmured a man in a pinstriped suit to his date. "Normal people don't fight like that." Victor, the manager, his face flushed and covered in sweat, approached Ilara. His eyes narrowed in accusation. "What the hell was that? What have you been hiding from us?" He acted as if she had betrayed him by not being helpless. Beatrice, meticulously fixing her hair, chimed in. "She's trouble. I knew it the second I saw her." Ilara offered no response. She simply resumed clearing glasses, her hands unwavering, her face blank. One of the police officers, a grizzled man with a buzz cut and a scar on his cheek, stopped dead when he saw her. He lowered his radio, his eyes wide with shock. "My God! Sergeant Ilara Vance," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quieted room. "I thought you retired." Every head in the gilded vault snapped toward Ilara. Ilara nodded once, subtly. Her voice was soft but clear. "I just wanted a normal life." The officer shook his head, a faint, genuine smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "Navy Special Forces, counter-terrorism. You trained with my unit back in 18. You saved my ass in Kabul." The guests' faces underwent a seismic shift. Silas's jaw tightened. Beatrice's eyes widened to saucers. Brandon stared intently at the floor, and Tiffany's nervous laughter vanished, replaced by a frantic fidgeting with her earrings. Ilara didn't need to say another word. As the police finished clearing the scene, a woman in a silk scarf, her hands still visibly trembling, cautiously approached Ilara. She held out a crumpled napkin. You dropped this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman's eyes were wide, not with judgment, but with something akin to awe. Ilara took the napkin, her fingers brushing the woman's, and gave a slight nod. "Thanks," she said, her tone soft yet steady. The woman backed away, her husband pulling her close. It was the first small act of kindness Ilara had received that night. She tucked the napkin into her apron pocket, next to the old photograph. But the lingering resentment remained. A businessman, his tie loosened, leaned back and scoffed. "At the end of the day, she's just a waitress. Nobody's going to believe she saved us." Beatrice, brushing spilled wine off her expensive dress, added, "She got lucky. That's all. Probably some fluke." Silas nodded, his voice low and sharp. "She's still nobody. Doesn't change a thing." Their wounded egos prevented them from admitting they had been wrong about her. Ilara heard every word, but she did not flinch. She continued her work, stacking plates, her hands as steady as ever. During the cleanup, Victor pulled her aside. His face red with a mix of fury and fear. "You could have gotten us sued," he snapped, his hands gesticulating wildly. "Do you think you're some kind of vigilante? You're fired, Ilara. Get your stuff and go." The room quieted as heads turned. A few guests smirked, Silas among them, as if Ilara's termination proved their point. Ilara slowly set down the stack of plates. "You sure about that?" she asked, her voice low, her eyes locking onto his. Victor faltered, but his weak bravado forced him to double down. "You heard me. Out." Elara did not argue. She picked up her tray and walked to the staff entrance, her steps even, her silence louder than any protest. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire, finally moved. He brushed off his perfectly tailored suit and walked toward the path Elara had taken. The room watched, holding its breath. He stopped in front of her, his substantial presence filling the space. "I don't see a waitress," Marcus said. His voice low but projected clearly enough to reach every corner of the room. "I see the only person here who kept her nerve." He extended his hand. Elara looked at his hand, then at his face, her expression calm but searching. She shook his hand, her grip firm, her eyes unblinking. "From today," Marcus announced, speaking louder now, addressing the entire room of stunned patrons, "I appoint her head of security for my corporation." Silas Thorne's jaw dropped. Beatrice's glass slipped from her fingers, spilling more wine. Brandon looked away, his face instantly turning scarlet. Leo, the young busboy who had been hiding behind the bar, stepped forward, his hands shaking but his voice cracking with admiration. "I saw what you did," he said to Elara, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You saved us, all of us." The guests shifted uncomfortably, some glaring at Leo as if he had betrayed their carefully constructed reality. Elara met his gaze, and her expression softened for the first time that night. She nodded once. "Just doing my job," she said. Leo swallowed hard, his moment of courage spent, and stepped back. But the moment hung there, a crack in the room's hostility, a sign that the truth, once revealed, could not be erased. The next morning, the headlines crashed like a tidal wave. Billionaire chooses waitress as head of security after restaurant robbery. Security footage from the Gilded Vault leaked instantly, Elara's precise takedown replayed endlessly in slow motion, her calm face a stark counterpoint to the surrounding terror. The comments were relentless. Some hailed her as a hero, others clung to the suspicion that she was a plant or a criminal. But the truth was undeniably out. Silas Thorne's hedge fund took a significant hit when a viral post highlighted his sneer over the Merlot. "This guy mocked the woman who saved his life," read the caption, paired with a clip of his smug face quickly followed by his panicked dive under the table. His firm issued a desperate, panicked statement, but clients were already pulling their trust. Beatrice's charity gala, scheduled for the following month, lost its primary sponsor after her shelter comment and her dramatic shriek about Elara ruining things went viral. The socialite backlash was swift. Her friends distanced themselves, and her texts went unanswered. A week later, Elara walked into a high-rise boardroom for her first day as Marcus Sterling's head of security. The executives, all in tailored expensive suits, fell silent as she entered. One of them, a man with a slick smile, had been seated near Silas's table that night and had laughed at Beatrice's cruelty. Now he nervously stood to offer Elara a chair, his hand visibly trembling. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice overly polite, "we are lucky to have you." Elara simply nodded, taking the seat without a word. On her desk was that same creased photo, now placed in a small frame. She didn't need to mention it. The room's deference was new, but her steady, searching gaze was precisely the same. Brandon's crypto startup fared no better. A high-profile tech blogger tweeted, "Crypto bro mocked a Navy vet who saved his ass. Investors, you cool with this?" His critical funding round stalled immediately, and his inbox flooded with demands for immediate explanations. Tiffany, who had laughed about Elara's lack of class, went completely silent online. Her meticulously curated social media accounts were locked down after screenshots of her mean-spirited comments spread rapidly. The consequences were not loud or dramatic, but rather the quiet, crushing weight of truth finally catching up to their arrogance. Elara, however, paid little attention to the fallout. She was already focused on her new role, in a sleek office high above the city. Her desk remained bare, save for the framed, creased photograph of her in fatigues. She didn't talk about the headlines. She didn't seek attention. She just worked the same as always. After a security briefing, one of Marcus Sterling's junior aides, a young woman with a nervous smile, approached Ilara. "I was at the Gilded Vault that night," the aide confessed, twisting her hands together. "I didn't say anything, but I saw how they treated you. I am so sorry." Ilara looked at her, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "It's done," she said, her tone gentle but final. The aide hesitated, then handed Ilara a small card with a handwritten note. "Thank you." Ilara tucked the card into her pocket, next to the old photo, and walked away. The gesture was small, but it landed like a stone in still water, creating a ripple of warmth within her persistent silence. Now, the way Ilara moved through a room had changed. People noticed. They deferred to her. Their voices were quieter when she spoke in meetings. Her suggestions carried weight. Her presence alone was enough to shift the mood. When Marcus Sterling entered the room, his nod to her was enough to silence all chatter. She was no longer just the woman who took down 3 robbers. She was the woman who had changed the entire room without raising her voice. Her silence was no longer misinterpreted as weakness. It was recognized as power. Years ago, Ilara had put away the medals and packed the uniform. She had sought a quiet job, a small apartment, a life where she didn't have to be a hero. But that night, when the door shattered and the guns appeared, she didn't have a choice. It wasn't about proving anything to the arrogant patrons. It was simply about who she was. Now, standing at the window of her new office, the vast city sprawling below, Ilara did not feel like a winner or a hero. She just felt like herself, steady and sure, the way she had always been. One evening, leaving the massive corporate building, a street vendor called out to her, holding up a cheap, beaded bracelet. "For you, lady," he said, his grin wide. The simple moment hit her with unexpected force. She froze, her hand halfway to her bag, the memory of that dusty, distant market flooding back. She took the bracelet, her fingers brushing the cheap beads, and handed him a generous bill. "Keep the change," she said softly. The vendor nodded, unaware of the profound weight of that small gesture. Ilara slipped the bracelet into her pocket, next to the photo and the handwritten note, and continued walking, her steps steady, her eyes focused firmly forward.